Welcome to the second TMDA 2020 meeting. Our topic today is hiring well and setting the right culture for small medical device companies in a remote world. First, I'd like to take a few minutes to welcome you for taking your time out of your day to come join us. We're very excited to have you. I do want to cover a few housekeeping notes before we begin. Please place your computer and cell phone on mute and turn your cameras off to reduce distractions. If you are using your phone for audio, it is essential to mute your computer. Also, at any time, please use the chat box to submit questions. We have a lively topic today, and we'd like to hear your questions and even your experiences for your own companies. We will go through them in the order they were received, and we will share those with the panelists to answer them. Also, please note this webinar is being recorded. This recording will be available afterwards on the TMDA website. I'd like to now talk about our sponsors. We're very proud and excited to have all of these folks. We're growing in size, as you could see. So let's run through those. We've got CAI, we've got Emergo UL, BSI, Med to Market, Qualio, StatKing, QA Consulting, Dickinson Wright, Aylin Data, Avamine. Also, we've added some in-kind sponsorships for our board members and the companies they represent. Those are Artemis Communications, ENT Vantage Diagnostics, Ensemble Orthopedics, Technology in Motion, Health Tech Insight, Oriel Statomatrix, and 510K Cafe. Today, we have three panelists, one of which is doubling as a moderator. So right now I'll introduce our moderator, and then I will let her take it from there and introduce the other two panelists. So today, moderator is Dr. Renee Rogers. She comes to us with over 25 years experience in coaching and consulting. She specializes in professional development, including high potential development, goal setting and performance management, succession planning, and learning management. She's been a key member of the team at Zimmer, successfully merging the two entities, Centerpulse Limited and Zimmer, and then more recently, led culture shaping initiatives to support the successful merger of Zimmer and Biomet. So we're very excited to hear what we have to say today. Renee, I will turn it over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. My old friend, Joe Scraba, from the early startup days of Intermedic Orthopedics, which went through the history that was just described to you, invited me to come on this call. And he also invited me to invite my colleagues to come and share their experience. He said, do you know any experts on this topic? And so I immediately thought of two of my long-term friends and colleagues, Betsy, Aylin, and Carroll, who together have a huge amount of experience, both inside companies and also as consultants and coaches outside companies, to come and just explore with me this topic of post-pandemic, what are really the challenges that leaders face in these new emerging business conditions? And how do leaders attract, retain, motivate, align, develop their employees in these challenging conditions? So actually, I'd like to invite Anna and Betsy to just say a couple of sentences themselves. You do have our background, so we don't want to take up too much time with that. But Anna, could you just say a couple of sentences about yourself? So I think you're muted. You need to unmute.
Unmute. Hi there, I'm so sorry. Hi there, I'm glad to be here today. Hi, Renee. Hi, Joe. Thank you for inviting me to come. Glad to be with you today. I've worked with Renee and from Intermedics, the history of that whole company, to Zimmer, and worked with Joe at Zimmer. And I really enjoy doing organization development work. And more recently, in the past decade or so, I focused on feedback feedback, fast feedback, everyday feedback. I call it everyday feedback, and have been writing blogs and working with companies on specifically jumpstarting their feedback initiatives. And there's so much that goes into that it's really interesting. So I'm glad to talk about it today.
Great, thank you, Anna. And Betsy, if you could jump in and say a couple of words about yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm Betsy Aylin, and I am currently an independent consultant. I have worked, however, internally as a director of HR and organization development consulting in a great variety of types of organizations, ranging from public utilities to high tech. And I've also done consulting work with not-for-profits. I think one of my most interesting pieces of work was helping a group spin out from A&D to become a startup company. It was sort of a culture reversal almost. And culture is one of my interests. I do a lot of leadership work, and designed and presented a leadership course that we've been doing for a number of years, and a longtime friend of Renee's, and happy to be here today and look forward to our conversation with you all.
Yes. So I don't think it's sad to say, but collectively, if you added it all up, the three of us have quite a bit of experience in this topic, as well as gray hair. So we're really pleased to be able to share that with you today. I thought I'd start with Betsy. I think for the first 45 minutes, I'm going to ask some questions that we prepared in advance, and then for the second half of the session, we'll open it up and receive questions from the participants, and we'll just continue the conversation in that way. So maybe Betsy, if you could start, because I know we've had many long conversations about culture, about this amorphous thing called culture. And I know you're really expert in it, not only in terms of practical experience, but also being very interested in the research. So in this post-COVID world that we live in, what changes in workplace culture do you see emerging that are necessary for companies not only to survive, but to thrive? And also maybe as a part of that, how do you see this increased reliance on working remotely, either helping or hindering the whole culture?
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Renee. Culture has been a long time interest of mine. And I came across a very interesting study by Barrett Value Center, and they did a survey of over 1,000 companies. I think it was 1,380 companies, international, all types. And they looked at values pre-COVID, and then they did the same survey after COVID came. And the changes I thought were extremely interesting. There were certainly have a standard instrument, 150 questions, and people are asked to rank values. And what they saw is that there were significant changes in the post-COVID values versus the pre. And I'll just give you a couple of examples and then talk about what I think this means for the future. So the first is personal values about making a difference, adaptability, and well-being and caring came up. And then for the organization, some of those same values came up. In addition, agility, some are obvious, digital connectivity, never been more important in the workforce. But also innovation came up and shared vision came up. What was also interesting is what went down, and that was things, this is gonna maybe seem odd, but achievement went down and bureaucracy went down, and results orientation went down. That may seem counterintuitive, but my sense is that what we're bringing out of COVID is a greater sense of sort of bringing our whole self, bringing our humanity, being less formal in the way we connect with others. And so I think employees are looking for workplaces where they can have easy communication where it's they're not limited by formal bureaucracy, and where their own values align with the organization values. So I think that's a big piece of what organizations are looking for now. And I see it as a trend. I think the trend is also indicated for younger people coming into the workforce around their expectations.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It's the kinds of things we've been saying for a long, long time, but it's like
Right.
Everything gets more accelerated and compressed.
Yeah.
Anna, do you have any thoughts on that? Are you seeing the same trends?
I'm thinking yes, and also since we're working remotely, and so we're working at a distance, it's really important that we establish sort of emotional relationships and comfortable relationships that are actually close, because we've got to make up that difference. So instead of working at a distance, we're working actually closer. And as managers, as leaders, we have to set the context so people know what's going on. They know what this really means. That as a leader, I stimulate some arguments, some discussion about what does this goal really mean? What does it not mean? So I need to lead that context building in that kind of environment.
If I could add one thing, Renee, I think I've been told a number of you all here are working in startup companies. I think you all have a great opportunity. I think that's an opportunity way more than just a deficit, because you can establish a culture instead of having to undo a culture. And so I think this is a great time to be building for the future.
Yeah, that's a really good way to look at it. I think too, there's a lot of advantages in remote working in cultures that I've worked in, which are much more established companies. It was really, really hard to get people to get leaders to allow their employees to work remotely. And it does afford this kind of flexibility for employees that is just necessary for daily life. And so I think it could be seen as an opportunity. What are you seeing in terms of, there's going to be, because it's remote, a lot more reliance on email and texting, and just a lot of opportunities for misunderstandings about that context that you talked about, Anna, needing to create. What are your thoughts about what leaders need to do to kind of overcome some of the inherent challenges when you're not face-to-face?
I think when you're not face-to-face, you're missing a lot of cues, first of all, and that's something that's well-known, well-studied, that you're not seeing. There's been a lot of brain research and other kinds of research to say what goes on with Zoom, say, and what are the problems with it. We're not seeing people's moment-by-moment reactions. We're not looking them in the eye necessarily, and sometimes we're not even seeing a picture of them, depending on how you're teleconferencing. But so you have to do special things to make it even closer, to warm things up and create some informality. You want to have clarity, you want to have transparency, and you want to make sure that people are authentic. And so it makes it a lot easier when people know people a little more personally. So you have to go even further as a leader and get to know everybody personally, have some one-to-one conversations with people so you know them, they're comfortable. So if there's a problem that they're having on a project, they really feel comfortable telling you what's going on and why they're delayed, so that really helps you get your project done. So you need people to feel comfortable, authentic, transparent, and so they can help build your speed that you want in a startup company.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of writers have referred to this new world that we're living in. This is even pre-COVID, but post-COVID is even more true. They call it the VUCA world, a world that's volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And nothing really embodies that VUCA quality more than a startup venture. So Anna, what do you see leaders challenged both to do and to be in order to live in these times? How do they need to show up with their teams, with their employees, with their colleagues?
I think we have to show up big. We have to give them a lot of we have to give them a lot of paint on the palette so that they can see what we're thinking, that we can talk about a lot of things. You can't leave quite as many things to chance or to hoping they get the context. And that's where I think we have big mistakes, where people aren't really leading many as engaging conversations as we need to. So that's one big challenge. And another is assuming that people will just have the work in front of them, have the chart, the project that they're supposed to be doing, and just go from there, and not coordinating things quite enough. And it's going to take more coordination in this kind of environment.
Yeah. I'm thinking about the introverts out there when you say show up big.
And a lot of the leaders in this field and a lot of technical fields are introverts.
Yeah.
My husband's a computer programmer. He's very introverted. So, I mean, most people, a lot of people in this world are introverted, and a lot of the people on your teams are introverted. So that's a new challenge as well.
Right. What are your thoughts on that, Betsy?
Yeah, I think now more than ever, I don't think this is new, but I think the need is even greater. The leader has to be an open person who's inviting others into conversation. I think people will tell you what's on their minds, but they may not tell you if you don't ask. So it's through little practices, even like a little check-in at the beginning of the meeting, to more one-on-ones, but to build that personal relationship with people, and to show up as yourself, so to speak. I think one of the things that's happened in COVID, we've lost some of the formality, which I think is great, that's been in organizations. And so everything from being more casual in how you dress to just asking lots of questions to invite people into the conversation.
Okay.
Outside was quiet offensively, but getting the job.
And regarding that, you know, I'm reminded, it's always been true, but how important it is now, creating an environment of safety and trust.
Right.
Any thoughts on how leaders with this remote world promote safety?
She came on the floor in the middle, a couple of kills, a couple of blocks.
We hear a little bit in the background. I'm not sure what that is. Okay. Anna, any thoughts on that? How do these big leaders make things safe?
Well, I think safety, a lot of safety, this sounds like it's contradictory. Honesty creates safety, because if, for instance, I know you're going to tell me if I'm doing something wrong, you're going to help me figure out what I need to do, help me improve. And you're not holding back and going to drop some big bomb on me later that I can go home on the weekend. I know how I'm doing. You're giving me feedback. You're giving me positive feedback. You're also giving me things. Hey, here's some ideas for how you can do this, how you can do that. So we're sort of explaining and talking to people more quickly and more regularly, day to day. That's why I call my concept here everyday feedback. So it's no big deal. It's like you can give me feedback, I can give you feedback. So I think feedback's really key. And that's weird because you asked me about creating trust. And most people think I can't say a negative word. I can't say anything that implies improvement until I have this really close, warm, trusting relationship where no negatives are discussed about the project, say, till later. And I think that's a wrong idea. I think trust is built when you feel comfortable with me, and we've even actually talked about some issues that I'm facing here. Here's some training that I can help you with. And so I think that trust involves honest feedback, and which is really interesting.
And this issue of trust where people really will speak up and tell you what's going wrong,
exactly,
as well as what's going right.
Amy Edmondson is somebody that's done a lot of work in the area of safety, of this sense of safety, and she's looked at a lot of different teams, including, I think, a big study at Google. But making it so safe to ask questions, not being punitive if somebody misses something or messes up. Modeling vulnerability, okay, even I've screwed up too. And so all of those sort of very human practices, I think, really help to create a sense of safety.
Absolutely. Yeah. Vulnerability. It's a good thing. Strong leaders are vulnerable leaders.
Yeah.
I'd love to get some participation from the participants right now, but we got a little bit longer. But I'm gonna throw another question out. Let's go back to the feedback idea, and I love your notion of everyday feedback. That it's normalizing feedback as a way of life. What do you think? What have you seen are the biggest barriers that leaders have in really giving feedback to team members, or even coworkers or bosses?
Yeah, members, your bosses, team leaders. The thing that is most important about feedback is really how I define feedback, which I define it as information. Actually, the scientific definition of feedback is coming back, like sound coming back from an action that was taken before. So really, it's information, and it's vital information that we need to do our jobs. Certainly in the technical world, you have feedback. How did this go? How do we measure it? All of that's feedback, and we need it in our day-to-day workplace behaviors of how we work effectively together. So really, feedback is information. If we deprive people of feedback, if we don't give feedback, if I'm avoiding giving feedback or avoiding receiving feedback, then I'm cut off from key information that I need to do my job. So if you think of you don't want to deprive people of the valuable information that they need to do their jobs. So that's a really big role. The big barrier is it's desperately needed now, particularly all the technologies we've got. Feedback's desperately needed, and it's needed hugely, more so than ever before. And yet we have so many barriers that are really more psychological or brain chemistry based behaviors that hold us back from. So in the neuroscience area, in the brain, what happens is the word think about the word feedback. I'd like to give you some feedback. Well, it's kind of like, first of all, you might assume that it's going to be negative feedback. And second of all, you're not thinking it as helpful necessarily. Some of you are probably, but a lot of people think of feedback as something to be avoided if I don't have a developed good relationship with people. And sometimes you think of the workers of today, the new workers, the younger people, they don't want, you've heard rumors probably, or maybe even have the view that they only want positive feedback, which is, I found not to be true. Because this generation, more than any other, wants to get ahead. They want to know what I need to do to do better, to be promoted, to do my job well. So don't hide that information from me. I want to know how I'm doing and what I need to do better. So it's really really important and to do it. And yet I have a barrier. What happens is feedback goes into the emotional brain, the amygdala, the source of the fight or flight reflex. And so what happens is when you think of giving feedback or receiving feedback, you start sort of shaking, or you start getting worried, particularly if it's a big issue you need to address right away. You actually display to the other person your fear. What happens there are these mirror neurons. So my brain is speaking to your brain, and you feel how uncomfortable I am. And therefore it gets in the way because you know that I'm uncomfortable giving the feedback, and then you're more uncomfortable receiving the feedback. So we have to really start with ourselves. The barriers are ourselves, and calming down the emotional part of the brain, reframing it to say, this is valuable information I need to share with my team. And thinking of it as positive. Hey, how do we need to address this so we can get ahead? And we reframe the meaning of what feedback's like. And so I'm not fearing it, and I'm not reflecting my own fear to you who are on the team. So I think the biggest barriers are ourselves, our assumptions. I want to be empathetic. Different people have different styles, analytical style, introverted. They may not want to speak up about something until a long time later. So you may have somebody who wants to make everybody feel good, what I call empathizing type. And then we have different ones that different styles that you can. Motivator, I have empathizer, analyzer, charger. That's get this done. This is wrong. And that's ineffective because you need to help people understand what they need to do differently. So I think our own styles, our own beliefs, our own assumptions, and our own brain science are the keys to being better at giving feedback.
If those are the barriers, then remote working is really just an excuse.
Yeah.
One could say. Makes it easier to maybe not overcome those personal challenges. Well, let me take these ideas now, collect them all together, and ask us to try to contextualize them in this world of startup. And Betsy, I know that you actually had the experience of moving from a company that spun off a startup, and then you worked with a startup company. In the startup world, resources are tight, money's tight. All those things feel like big challenges that have to be overcome. How do you see these ideas playing out in the startup world, and what is particularly unique about that context for what we're talking about today?
Well, I think one thing that is important in a startup world, it's important in every work environment, but that is to intentionally establish what you want the culture to be. And so in a startup, it's like, okay, we're great. We have this idea for a product, or we actually have this product. We know we want to sell it. We've got to go find customers. But the question is, how do you want to go about that? What do we want? Let's assume that we're going to grow. What do we want our work environment to be like? And so that as we grow, we're developing this culture. And I think that it's important that people have input into that. I mean, you may have the person whose brainchild the product is, that is like the head, or starting it with a few other people, and that's great. But you would be growing beyond that one product. And so getting people involved from the beginning to establish a way of working, I think, is just as important as getting the product. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think it makes a lot of sense. You know, I did a lot of work in what we call culture shaping.
Yeah.
And we were facing the challenge of an entrenched culture, this established company, an entrenched culture that actually had become detrimental to the company's success. It had become really dysfunctional in terms of really effectiveness and productivity. So you had to kind of break down that culture. I think the idea for startups that I hear you saying is that the opportunity is to be intentional and pay attention as you go to what kind of culture you're creating. So what's that? How does that challenge leaders? What's the onus on leaders around intentionality and culture creating?
I think one of the things that's so important, regardless of what size company you're in, is conversation. I mean, the formal term for it is dialogue. But so it's not just the leader imposing his or her stamp, but getting people involved in the conversation about how do we want to work? What kind of company do we want to be? What are our values? What's our vision? Yes, our vision, of course, is to grow, to serve customers, to do cool products. That's probably not sufficient. And so the intentionality, I think, is important, and then making it a conversation. When the group I worked with spun out from a larger organization, we had more employees than maybe a lot of startups, but we had employees throughout working on different aspects of the startup, so that everything that happened had the stamp of somebody besides the CEO. And I think that helps build buy-in. And of course, there was shared stock, which helped as well. So,
yeah. You know, in this VUCA world that we're describing, there are no answers if you cannot tap into the creativity of everybody who works there. So this need for innovation and collaboration has never been more present for us to navigate these really difficult times. If we, you know, I've heard sometimes in the context of startup companies, the idea of scrappiness. I think that was introduced to me in our a call we had preparing for this. Similar resilience, agility, qualities that leaders need to create a culture that is thriving. How about, could you, Anna, could you comment on those? And maybe their role in creating a feedback culture.
So for instance, for feedback culture, we have to model it. For instance, my first meeting, I start showing my value of feedback, or if somebody's new or whatever. And I start saying, you know what, y'all have been giving me some feedback that I'm not prepared well enough for some of these meetings and some of these things we're doing, and I'm not on time. So I just wanted to know, I'm really working on that. I just have a goal of that. And I'm going to be asking you next week and the week after how I'm doing on it. So that's really important. And then you might want to have feedback after a meeting. Let's brainstorm some quick things. How can this group work better together? What do we need to do differently on this project? So something that's appropriate. It's not singling people out, but it's saying, how can we do better on the project? So we want to model feedback in every day and every way you can possibly. And then you show that you're really open yourself to feedback, and that you're really, you're just sharing from your heart. You're authentic about what you're working on. You're not necessarily above it all, that you've got issues. The other thing is, I think both Betsy and Renee brought up was about being asked. I think one of the things people love about startups too, and about working in any company, and that's, they love to be in an environment where they're being asked, their opinion is valued. And luckily, since you're in a startup, everybody's kind of working on a lot of stuff. So, and we need your opinion. We need more ideas here. So how can we solve this problem? So really welcoming and overtly telling people you value their opinions, and welcoming and not squashing ideas that come out. So asking people, showing your value of that, and creating a culture of openness to new ideas is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So it's not what you say, it's what you do. It's how you model the very values that you would want to be pivotal to your culture. It's more important than ever before. You know, in my long history in HR, we often took the position in that discipline, HR, with managers, with employees, that you needed to leave your personal life behind and show up as a professional. And that the personal was always something that needed to be kind of sequestered off. I really sense a change in what employees want and what's really possible in organizations today. Betsy, can you comment on that?
Sure. One of the things I've noticed that I think is absolutely an irony coming out of the pandemic and our dependence on Zoom and similar platforms is, even though it seems like a very rigid form, there's something about, especially in seeing people in their sort of native setting, I think creates a sense of knowing each other. And I mean, I know we ask people to turn their cameras off, but for meetings, I really want, even in classroom, when I'm doing online courses, I want everybody live. And because I think there's something about seeing each other in our natural setting, where the dog comes in or the kid climbs on the lap, or, you know, things happen that makes it easier to be, you just don't have to put on this the person. So I think there has come out of that a surprising level of intimacy in some sense. And I also have found that for some reason, being on
She froze.
She froze. Yeah. I think her point is well taken, that there's the way in which there you go, you're back. You froze for a minute.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So the way we show up, I think we're more willing to put things out there on Zoom than we might have been even in person.
Yeah.
There's some of the connection. I get that. And so that's tough. But I also think the one thing I'd like to add in what you said about the values piece is, I think it's both important to name it and to demonstrate it. And so if you want to make it, you want people to show up as themselves, and maybe there's some limits to that, then invite it, verbally invite it, make it part of your cultural values, and then demonstrate it.
Yeah.
Can y'all
Can
tell that I like cooking? Can you tell that I like cooking? I love to have meetings in my kitchen.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, even national commentators, it switched. It used to be, you had to, everybody thought about what's behind me and blah, 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 which all of us still do to some degree, but they're doing it from kitchen. I've seen well-known commentators broadcasting from their bedrooms and stuff like that. And you just get a little sense of, oh, so she likes that kind of artwork, or, oh, look, he obviously has a hobby of X, Y, or Z.
So that kind of informality conveys a kind of invitation to people that, is appealing.
Yeah.
There is a question in the chat about how would you demonstrate modeling behavior. I think that's kind of what we're talking about here. Maybe what we're also challenged to do is just have a greater level of awareness of how we come across. And when we say things, what is the impact of that? And then in the feedback culture, ask people what kind of reaction they have to what we say. So there's a kind of personal learning journey that goes on with all this as each of us becomes more and more aware, challenged by the remote conditions we're operating in, to show up more conscious and more aware and more inviting of interaction so we can learn more.
Yeah.
There's a good question in the chat about, because we're talking about these aspects of culture, and but how do we make sure that the culture that we are intending and creating will assure the mission of the business?
Well, again, I think culture is how you go about it as much as it is what. So there's a question here about how do mission and culture reinforce each other. So your mission is about what you do, although there may be included in it some descriptions that indicate how you do it. But it's important. I mean, you wouldn't set a cultural value of nobody works more than 30 hours a week. I mean, that's not a cultural value, but something that means your mission wouldn't be successful. So you do have to think about that. And so, having your mission or even your vision, which is looking longer term, and then, what are the values that support us in the way we want to go about it? There are a lot of ways we could go about it, but how do we want to go about it?
Right. Yeah, go ahead, Deanna. Yeah, please.
It's really important not to contradict the mission. So sometimes I've heard people having a really hard mission. We've got to get this accomplished. We're valuing speed. We wanted all these things really quickly, get it done, get our first round, get our whatever. And then they want to create a culture. What culture do you want? Well, I want everybody to really be nice to each other. I want to feel good about it. I want to have some team building activities after work. They come up with a real touchy-feely, soft kind of culture idea that it's never going to work. It's not going to fly. Sometimes in large corporation, that happens when, say, they bring in a consultant who comes in with all these games to play during the training, and that completely contradicts the culture and the intention of the executive team. So we don't want to be nicey nice when we're not really, we don't want to create something that contradicts what we're trying to do. So we want to be realistic and incorporate that honesty into the culture we want to create.
And authentic.
Okay, yeah.
So there's actually just one more domain that I want to refer to, and then I'd like to, if we can, open it up, and maybe some of the participants could share an experience or anything they've been thinking about. But I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the issue of hiring. It's a hard challenge always. It's always the big job of HR to get the right talent in the door. But in a world that's remote and complex. How can leaders meet the challenge of attracting, hiring, and maybe most importantly, onboarding employees, the right talent that they need?
Yeah, well, I think that, of course, you're clear about, okay, we need a certain kind of engineer who can do this, or we need a certain skill marketing or salesperson. But more than that, or in addition, not more than, in addition, thinking about what kind of person do we want to bring in? So if you're a startup, you probably want, and actually the survey I mentioned first rated this real high, you want somebody who with agility. And so because you don't know what you're going to encounter, right? And so hiring people that can deal with a great variety of things is critical. And you just would screen for that in your hiring, if that's one of the things that's important to you. Of course, you need all the technical. This is not in lieu of that, but it's in addition to that.
Yeah.
And when we were building the startup, we also, we had thought about what kind of culture we wanted, how people needed to work in this setting versus the previous setting. And we interviewed and screened for those.
Right, right. And in terms of sourcing, I would say keep your networks as broad as you can, because you don't want to just hire your friends, but probably, in a startup environment, you're not using formal recruiters as much as larger companies. So keep your networks really broad and try to source as much variety as you can, and hire, as Betsy says, for culture as well as for technical skills. Yeah.
We did one little strategy that worked actually quite well at one point. And you have to be a little careful of it, but we offered cash rewards for people that suggested someone who actually got hired. Mm-hmm. So you got to be a little cautious with that you're not just winding up with a bunch of clones in your organization. That's not effective for overall results, but
you're asking the whole organization to care about the challenge of bringing people in, and that can only be helpful. Yeah. How about onboarding, bringing people into the organization in a way that's effective so that they can actually hit the ground running? Anna, you helped me do a lot in the past around onboarding, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's really important to help get that context going right away. So when you bring people in, you need to be with them, have people working with them right away. Don't just put them in a room and give them some technical, give them their computer and a big stack of manuals and stuff. But you need to sit there and help them interpret the context for what they're being asked to do. And then have somebody you think would have different people rotate and work with them. So I think that the onboarding is really important. Get them talking, get them asking questions, get them comfortable, put them with people, assign some people to help different times with them who are going to be very open and who are going to provide a positive feeling about the workplace and the environment. Because there's what people don't know when they walk into a new environment is massive, but they don't know anything. And so it's like a new baby trying to crawl or something. So you've got to help them. You've got to guide them. You've got to cradle them to some degree to help them see the world through the eyes that the company sees it, or that you see it, or the manager, and put them in have them go into different rooms and try different things. And so I think that it's really important. Don't underestimate the amount of time you need to spend talking to them or having people work together at the first.
Right.
And I think, in startup situations, unlike in established companies where you have policies and procedures, you have processes that are in place that have been tested that work, and you're needing to orient people to those. In startups, often you're asking people to do a job for which it is not known exactly how they're going to do that job. Maybe they're even coming in to establish that process. So this whole notion of really collaboration and feedback and interaction and communication is more important than ever before. So I feel like we've been talking to ourselves. I'd love to get some more interaction going. I don't know who's out there that can help us, Alyssa or Ryan. Shall we open it up?
Sure thing. So yes, everyone, please feel free to post your questions in the chat section. We do have one. When you're working remote, how would one demonstrate modeling behavior?
Yeah, we did. I saw that one too. We did kind of talk about that. I mean,
Yes.
if maybe any further thoughts on that? Role modeling on the phone, on the video, on the Zoom.
Well, I think, part of the behavior you're looking for, you're gonna do. So in other words, if you want your culture to be an open culture, you want people engaged, then you're going to be inviting them to be engaged. If you want your culture to be one where you learn from mistakes, then you're going to ask questions about learning instead of, dissing somebody. And I feel like, again, part of that is being aware of what you want to model. And then I think you can model it. I don't know if that.
No, I think that captures.
And so that requires us to evaluate ourselves, assess ourselves.
Sure. To be aware. Yeah, to be aware. In our little leadership program, we talk about everybody casts a shadow, not in the negative or not in the Jungian sense, but just we have an impact on other people. And to be aware of what is the shadow that I'm casting. And then, as Anna, you've talked so coherently about, how do I get feedback on that?
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. We also had some other additional comments, questions submitted prior to. So one of them, for example, was, what are the biggest barriers leaders have in giving feedback to team members or coworkers? And should the feedback process change in light of remote working scenarios?
I would say not giving feedback, believe this or not giving any feedback, not giving specific enough feedback, holding back on feedback, or the big feedback avoidance, or the huge barriers that people have. It's not usually the bull in the china shop, although that can be true as well. But there's some things you help. I tend to be impatient, so I talk really fast. I'm impatient sometimes, so I know that about myself. So I share that with people. So I don't always want to be that way, but that's what I'm working on. So you can role model it that way. But I think that the barriers are not giving feedback, not sharing feedback, and so you need to find a way to get started and overcome your own barrier. Everybody's got barriers to it. They're either too nicey nice, or they're blunt and it's not effective, or they're kind of like your mom or dad. They're trying to coach you in this very paternalistic way. You don't want that. So you want to be able to lay down the facts and give them information. And so I think the biggest barrier really is in our own fear about feedback, how it's going to be, we're hurting people. We're going to make them leave the company. They're going to be so upset. So I think we need to overcome those beliefs.
I have one other thought on this, and that is, ask people about what feedback they want and how they want to receive it. Just create, and I think that helps let them design the way in which feedback will come, because as Anna said, people want feedback in different ways. And so understand that. Again, I think it's just being aware of and helping create awareness of the importance of it. Renee and I have talked a lot, maybe several of you have too. There's a book, Build an Everyone Culture, and the whole organization, intentionally, it's about building an intentionally development culture. And I think what happens in startups is we get so focused on the product and the financing that we forget about the role of development that has to grow along with that. And the feedback is such a critical part of that. So again, maybe just talking about that from the beginning, that development is a piece of our culture. We're going to do development. We're going to give each other feedback. Here are the ways we're going to do it. And it's going to happen whether we're in person or not.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of times you think about, okay, giving feedback is that 1 hour, once a year conversation,
Yeah.
And it's just not.
No.
I mean, that's part of it, but that's not all of it.
Yeah. And we're having to overcome the barrier that there's a lot of information that we used to get when we were in person that we're not getting now. So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on how you really assess what's going on, or how you make sure you're on top of understanding the actual performance when you're not together with people very much?
I'd like to ask if anybody in this group has thoughts on that. But you're in the trenches. How do you know if you're getting what you need? How do you know where people are? How do you know if you're getting the results?
Yeah.
Surely somebody out there.
Is there a way we can open up?
Yeah, so for the participants, you're welcome to unmute yourself if you would like to participate in answering that question, please.
And I'm not afraid to call on people.
I see Martin.
Yeah, so in terms of validating that the feedback is being received and processed and valued, my comment had to do with specific examples where leaders weren't real good at processing what I'd call valid market, client, product feedback, right?
Yeah.
Their vision and their mission, they're running to it, they've got a great attitude. But particularly in healthcare, where problems lead to injury and death.
Yeah, right.
Quality matters, and whether that quality is an engineering function, whether it's a relationship function, whether it's a financial function, you have to work through all the excruciating details.
Yeah.
And if things may look great in a PowerPoint presentation, right? But if there are problems in the OR, in the clinic, after implant, with infection, it doesn't matter what that is. If you don't have people who can deliver feedback in a way, and safety was mentioned first, right? What's a critical conversation? If you can't maintain that, you get what I call kind of the death by silence, right?
Yeah.
Where everything falls apart because no one's willing to take those beatings anymore.
Martin, have you found some ways that make that easier or possible? Because what I hear you talking about is sort of natural defensiveness. We all have that to some degree. And you're talking about how you break through that.
I'll give it from two perspectives. One, from a leadership perspective, where you have to be extraordinarily vulnerable and beg for the spears, basically.
Right.
And you have to take them, and you have to not overly react to them, as painful as they might be. But then you have to be disciplined enough to validate that information with employees, with clients, right, with suppliers, whatever the problem, the scope of the problem is, and define a path by which you're going to address it. And that's letting everybody know what that is, what their role is.
Yeah.
And taking ownership in that problem. And I've experienced that with leaders who, when as a product manager, a low-level, first-level marketing person, we had a serious corporate global glove problem, right? And it took this little 25-year-old to go to the corporate division president and saying, hey, we have a serious problem that's about to bite us to the tunes of millions of dollars.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is both demonstrate you're willing to, as you said, take those spears, so that you don't freeze up or whatever the first time somebody gives you criticism. But not only that, you listen to it, you hear it, you understand it, but then I hear you saying you investigate and follow up on it and communicate that while you're doing it.
Yeah, so often I see a defense mechanism of the source of the information not being positive or
Yeah.
not being clear when they've identified a legitimate, physical, operational quality
I
concern.
think we need to thank those people. So always in a manager, say you have a meeting and you have somebody screaming uncle, getting upset about it, getting angry with them. It's like, thank you so much. Even if you know in your own scientific knowledge that they are kind of off here and they may be wrong, you need to still thank you so much. That's such an important issue. I'm glad you brought it up. And then you could reinforce it to the whole group. Like Renee brought this up. It's so good. We need to work on it and then figure out, hold a rational discussion of problem solving with the whole group and never diss that person, because then I think, as you referred to, that person and other people will never speak up again.
Right.
And that happens in safety, for environments, certainly, just
Yes.
like in a plant, say. I used
One thing I learned from my architect father, and though I never worked in architecture, was what's called problem seeking.
Yeah.
Right? You have to go
Right.
you have to hunt the
Yeah.
problems down and find them before they find you.
Right.
Right? Building collapse and kills everybody.
May I add something on this remote question and accountability for
Please.
personnel? What we found and what we document with our customers is that it's an earned value system. Our job descriptions need to be specifics on what the deliverable is, and that's internal as well. So if you don't know what you're supposed to be doing on a day-to-day basis, then it's up to us as managers to establish those rules so that the individual can say, hey, I'm waiting on Sam to review this document in QA and validation and process development, wherever it is. And that document control or that process control can be measured on a day-to-day basis, because, company in Austin had a bunch of young engineers and they love sports and they talk sports all day long when we were on site. COVID hits, they work remote, and the excuse to the boss was, well, the package is sitting on so-and-so's desk is no longer there because now it's electronic and you can track that electronically. And they were reluctant to do that prior to COVID. So it's measurable. Like, okay, he's reviewed it Tuesday at 4 o'clock. It is now Thursday, 3 o'clock. Now, where is that? And are you poking those people to review that process? And it can vary from, function to job function.
Yeah.
But that's how you hold people remotely responsible for their duties. It has to be specific and measurable so that you can provide that feedback. Hey, this has been sitting at 25% completion for 2 weeks now. What's the holdup? Well,
Yeah.
they need.
Yeah, I think you've raised a really good point, Dwayne. And even soft jobs like HR, I mean, you can still do that. And I think of it as a sense of fairness, which all of us innately want. And that is, don't evaluate me if you don't know what I'm doing, and don't evaluate me if you haven't told me what you want me to do and how I'm going to be evaluated. It's like, well, as a kid, your parent gives you a chore, you kind of do it, and then later they're not happy. Well, you didn't tell me you wanted, and you can't give every little piece, and these are very capable adults, so you don't need to do all of that. But I think that being clear on what's expected, so that then you can go back and measure. You may in this can be in remote or non-remote, you can get feedback from people that are working with that person as well. I think as long as you have let everybody knows, okay, we're all going to do 360 feedback all the time. And as long as that's known ahead, then people don't feel like, oh, my manager's going around looking for dirt.
Right.
on me.
But
So
once you start building, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Betsy, but once you start building those measurables and metrics, it gives them job description and clarity, because
yeah, right.
what you think I do, I may not do because that's somebody else's function, or you think it just happens magically. Well, I can document now to you and say, look, this is what I have to do to get this to the finish line,
Yeah.
whether it be a product, whether it be a process, whatever that may be. and it will help you become more efficient, especially if you have to, think ahead to pre-order something that normally takes a lead time of a month. And now with COVID, that may take 2 or 3 months. So you got to really be thinking ahead. So
Thinking ahead, right.
And I hear you
If
say
I
you
may
can't.
add, this is Pratap from San Antonio. I work for an incubator, and I've done about 13 startups before, and we're doing about 8 now here. So I work in the startup world. I've always adhered to I've come up, in my first startup, I came up with a system that my funder said, hey, 80% completion rate when I ask for progress is great, but I know it's all made up. So we made up a KPI system saying, is it done or is it not done? Some
Right.
really determinable ways to tell by the end of every quarter. So it's a quarterly system because things change too much in a startup to
Right.
basis. And it seems to have worked well. So even during COVID, I've used it for my reports here. And, it's very clear cut. I mean, I kind of press them when developing the goals to say, okay, can I answer at the end of the quarter, yes or no? If I can't, then you have to change the criteria that you have set for yourself.
Yeah, cool.
Not I'm 80% done or 90% done, because everyone knows, the other 10% takes the other 90% of the time. So, so that seems to have worked before COVID and after COVID too. So it's not
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing in your stories is you really can't take things for granted. You can't make assumptions that people are going to know and understand what it is they're doing, what it is they're supposed to do, and whether it's done. So this intentionality about being clear right from the very beginning is more important than ever before. You also had is it Pratap? You also asked, I saw in the question on the chat that a question about procedures related to checking for COVID exposure, while you're knowing that you don't have any control over what's happening at home. But maybe you want to help us understand that question a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, there's all the companies want to appear that they care about the safety of their employees. And of course we do. But in terms of, we have smart people working for us, engineers and other people on the business side. And they say, what is the point of me answering this questionnaire every day and having my temperature checked every day when, I'm going outside, especially here in Texas, right? I mean, the radiation and what the outside world environment looks like, grocery stores and schools and stuff. So, that's definitely a question I've faced. We still do it, but not really sure if it is useful, to be honest with you.
Years ago, Anna and I worked on a project around creating safety culture. You have safety procedures that you want people to follow, but that doesn't necessarily make for a culture that is really focused on safety. I don't know, Anna, can you maybe comment on that based on that experience?
Discoveries of that, it is sort of, you guys have been hitting on some of it, is that you want to make, so people make a mistake. You want to have them tell the story. You want to find out what's going on instead of just firing that person. I mean, obviously, if there's something really dangerous, some people who haven't followed procedures, it can be bad. But if it's just something like there was a mistake that was made, you want to learn from mistakes, all mistakes. You want to be able to tell stories about what happened and how to prevent that next time. So, but if you have environments where people just say, okay, you're fired, and nobody even knows what really happened, then we're not learning from it. So that's really important. So having a certain amount of openness is really important. And then other cultures are really, I know there was one company in Japan, we don't have any risk. So one of the questions you ask is, what's the next risk? What's creating a risk here? What's risky? And some people say, there's no risks here. We don't have risks. We don't have mistakes. Never make mistakes. Or other people are just like top down and just fire the person, and we don't even know what really happened and how to improve it. So you got to create the right culture where you have dialogue and communication across the different groups to make sure that works well.
And with COVID, there's obviously risks, but as you point out, this is a virus. So you do things that, within reason, but you also just have to hope that your employees and expect that your employees are going to be responsible in their behaviors, and you promote that through the culture, right?
Renee, there are a couple of good questions in chat.
Right.
Okay, good.
I think Adam's has not yet been answered. What do you suggest as far as adjusting timeframes for onboarding with the new normal of remote work? And also, do you suggest as an emergency protocol to help support a recent hire who may be struggling to get up to speed and perform their best in the role they've been brought in for?
Super question.
Yeah.
I think dialogue with that person about what's going well, what do you like about your environment now, what's hard, or what's the hard things to learn, and then what are you worried about, what are you concerned, what is the next step that you want to take. So ask them what they're planning to do, and then help them with areas that seem difficult or challenging. So you want to be in frequent conversation with people who don't know, and who then you also might role model your thinking process. I used to be a math teacher a long time ago, high school. So I would sometimes role model my thinking through a problem. And I would sometimes lead off with a fake, like, okay, we learned how to factor these equations yesterday, and we did this. Shall I go ahead and do that? And I'd start to put one that's really wrong on the board. And they go, no. And I would role model how to think about it correctly and how to think about it incorrectly. So sometimes you have to do that. When you're given 3 major priorities today. So what are you thinking about the priorities here? Or let me help you with those priorities. So you want to anticipate and teach people how to think about their overall job role in the company.
And that teaching is interactive.
Yeah.
So there is an extended time frame, because it's not only telling them, but it's also asking them and genuinely conversing with them to make sure that they do understand.
And
Yeah,
I think
go ahead,
sorry, go ahead. Dwayne, was that you?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I was just going to say, it has to be, I don't think just remote, because I'm a retired Navy nuke, and we had procedures for everything. But it has to be an orientation checklist, if you will, for a new person, and that they know who to go ask on their particular job on a day-to-day or at least a week-to-week basis, and report back to you, hey, how are you coming on your orientation, indoctrination, and do you have any specific questions? Now in this remote world, that has to happen, because they can come in a new, young, energetic, and we have it in our new engineer, and they're ready. I mean, I got a guy who's got a master's degree, and he showed up at this one facility and thought he was going to be, analyzing all kind of lab stuff. And, they had him doing data entry, and it was a deflator, but that they weren't ready for his role yet. Money's important, but also job satisfaction.
Right.
So, he could have been doing so many other things with his free time on the orientation side of the house and learning the business and other business areas that we have. So it's key that your people know who they need to go talk to and what you want them to, not on a person by person basis, but hey, here's your cheat sheet. Go get the signatures by these particular people on these areas. And that will help them or push them in the right direction, because a lot of times they don't know, and to ask a question, they're reluctant, and they are afraid they're going to sound dumb, if you will.
I have, this may have been mentioned before, I have a 6-year-old granddaughter who has Down syndrome, and she just had to start a new school, and we were all terrified for her because she, hadn't been in school for nearly a year. And so I happened to be, they live in Houston. I happened to go with her first when she was going to the school. But I learned a lot about orientation from what that school did. They had somebody meet her at the door, walk with her and us to her classroom. Her desk was set up with her name on it. There was a paper. She'd been assigned a buddy, and that buddy had made a picture for her, which was on her desk. And then the buddy, worked with her all day. So it's like, okay, helping people, walking with them in some sense, as they're coming into the new environment, preparing the environment, and then having knowledgeable people who will help coach that person into their new job and into the company, especially for all those things you can't put on a piece of paper. But all of that, then plus these other great ideas that y'all have suggested.
You bring up a great point, and the buddy system, that works in scuba diving. You have a instructor, but you also have a buddy,
right,
to rely on. So have you any experience, because we have been talking in our organization about in having that buddy to a newly onboarding employee to then be their source of kind of informal exchange. How does things really work here? How do you
yeah,
things done versus your direct supervisor? Because sometimes people are a little bit scared of
right,
asking what they think may be dumb questions to their supervisor.
right.
Start off my job looking really dumb.
That's
Yeah.
great. You could rotate the buddy too. So one person's not sort of burdened with taking out so much time. You can have a buddy and then have a different buddy that you think might be a good match with them next week or this day or whatever. So you can continue, I would say, continue buddying, mentoring, shadowing longer than you think you need to. And so that they have more time to get their questions answered and feel more comfortable in the environment. So I think you're absolutely on track.
But with your guys' experience, has that worked? I mean, has that?
Yes, yeah, I used that when we were doing our startup. But one of the things that we did that I think helped with it is we gave guidelines or, some kind of little instruction to the buddies. So, because you don't automatically know what you're supposed to do. It's just like, so what is this role? What does it look like? How frequently should you check in? I think for a while, if it can be the same person, that's good, just because then it's easier to build a little rapport. But so yes, I've seen that be very helpful.
Great, thank you so much.
One of the issues that you run into is HR may say onboarding looks like this, and you're going to meet this person and a benefits person and somebody else. But really the job training is with the supervisor. And the supervisor has to understand exactly how their training program is implemented. So what you're really doing is you're relying on each supervisor to develop their own training program.
Right.
And that's a really hard thing to do because it's not scalable within an organization. So how do you deal with that from an organizational standpoint to make sure that the new employees are in a training program that looks somewhat consistent throughout the organization?
Go ahead, Renee.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say, never overestimate the quality of onboarding processes in established organizations.
Yeah, right, exactly.
It's like with a process that HR should be most ashamed of, because when left to HR, you do get these kind of perfunctory things that people get schooled on, but what really matters, they don't. And it will never be the case that the quality of the onboarding process doesn't fall on the manager and the supervisor.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it just will. Now, the organization can help them. First of all, they can value that role and validate that they're spending a lot of time on it. They can give some, if they're good at it, give some guidance on structures and processes and kind of overall, guidance on how that might look, ideas. But in the end, and you do get a challenge of consistency, but in the end, good managers onboard their employees because they don't want to have to go out and hire another one. They want to keep that employee, especially if it's a good hire. And it's like one of the most important things managers do. So I think organizations have to do a better job of valuing that contribution of managers and supervisors.
Putting it, I mean, that, if you've got a manager, and this would be in a larger organization, then that's part of that manager's job description. But not just, again, not just hold them accountable, give them the kind of support. I mean, you know, several of us have PhDs in instruction, and, you know, it ain't easy. Teaching people stuff is not easy. And so giving managers support, but making clear that that's an expected part of their role.
And encouraging the whole team to take a part in it.
Yeah, right.
The team
So it's not
members
just
have a
one
vested
person's
interest in the new employee succeeding as well.
Yeah.
I'd like,
You want to optimize what people are good at. So you have 3 different supervisors giving training in the same thing. So you might figure out who's training whom and what.
Right.
And some of them together create, let's use the same materials. Can we have your materials? Can you create something that we can use over and over again? So everybody has a little role in the training if there's any redundant training that needs to be completed.
Collaboration.
I'd like to go back to the accountability and feedback issue. First of all, I'm an ex-Center Pulse person as well.
Oh, wow.
A carbomedics person.
There you go. Small world, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But I've moved into the startup world, and in the startup world, it's different. The accountability and feedback is different, and it depends on where you are as a startup. Because if you're an early startup, it's different than a late funded startup. As an early startup, what you have is you have a lot of people that are not compensated fully. Yeah. So providing accountability and feedback to somebody who's giving you a little bit for free, so to speak, is different than if the fully salaried person who you have different levels of expectations. So the coaching is different, and I'll call it coaching as opposed to managing. It's really a coaching function that you're doing with those people to be able to get what you need out of them and holding them accountable as well.
That's a great point.
That's a really good point. You know, you have to really know the motivations of people because you're right. In startups, a lot of times it can't be money. They're not getting the money that they could get going to work for a bigger company. They're certainly not getting the job security. And so really, what is motivating them? My guess is that a vast majority of the time it's learning. It's the quality of the experience they're having. And of course, you know, feedback is central to that. But if we begin to understand feedback and its role in learning, I think it takes on a different character, and our intention becomes more authentic and can be more authentic and more honest. So feedback is critical, but I think understanding the motivations of the people who are doing the work in startups is important.
I'll just say one last thing on feedback too. When I look back on my career, the managers that I'm most upset with are the ones who didn't do course corrections early on, the ones that did not give me feedback earlier, that I could have changed things and done things better, faster, more effectively early on. So I think it's really all of our responsibilities. If you're providing feedback, it's your responsibility to that person to be totally honest and frank with them.
Yes,
right. So Renee, there's another question here that I'd love to hear several people weigh in on, in addition to our 3 so-called experts. It says, how do we transition back to a more normal work environment, back to the office, that balances safety and work goals to assure employees are on board? So what are you all thinking? What are you planning as you go back to work? And I see Martin has a hand up.
I'll comment first because I'm not claiming that my answer is in any way correct. But what I will say is we won't. There is not a defined known solution.
Okay.
I've been blessed to have a home office in some form or another since the 80s, since we had touch-tone phones was the latest technology. Some of us are comfortable working remotely, And some of us are comfortable in a corporate office and et cetera, et cetera. And some people are not.
Mhm.
Right.
When they left the office, they literally physically, emotionally, and financially fell apart.
Mm.
And I would get so many calls going, how do you do this? I go, I've done it for decades. This is not new to me. You know, even when I worked for a large corporation, I still worked remotely.
Yeah.
And you know, Zoom was no transition for me. I've been doing video conferencing for a long time. So there's a group called The Future of Work.
Yep.
And they have some very interesting discussions if you're interested in those kinds of things.
Yeah, I am.
I don't know how we define it. When I talk to somebody who's now at Dell Healthcare Infrastructure, he talks about things from the standpoint of, you know, how do we get people back into buildings and what technology is being built into that to be done at an extremely remote perspective.
Mhm.
It's not going to be the same. We may go back to buildings, but it's not going to be the same, in my opinion.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
We're
Me
never
too.
going to go
I-
back.
Sorry. go ahead.
I think there will be some going back, but it probably will even, and I doubt it will be, some people there, 40, 50 hours a week and some at home. I think it's going to be more sort of migratory. And I think this value that was highlighted in the survey again about agility, I think that's our future.
Yep, agreed.
It's
Tatap,
gonna-
did you have a comment? Were you going to say something?
Yes, ma'am. So yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think that genie is going to go back in that bottle. So
Right.
the startup world where we hire people for agility, flexibility, they have experienced more of that by working from home mostly. They like it because that's who they are. And personally, as a manager, leader, whatever, and a startup really cares about getting the work done. They don't care about formalities as much anyway. So I really don't care. I mean, it's like if you can get the stuff done by working from home, even being on social media some of the time that you're supposed to be working from home, I don't care. I really don't care.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's my opinion, but what do you guys think?
It's going to be a blended environment, and they can use tools. There are tools and technologies with chat and things that some people don't like, Slack and things like that, where they're constantly being interrupted, and it drives people crazy. And so you have just as many interruptions as you do in a way in an office. But so it's going to be a blended environment, and we can try to use the tools more smartly to make up the parts of it that we could have. You can have informal. You can work at home and have a lot of informal relationships easily, but it's just a different method to make that happen.
Right. It's definitely not a one size fits all. It depends
Yeah.
on what industry you are. If you're in production, whatever, or if you're just a engineering firm and, coming up with drawings and specs and those types of things, then it's totally different. So, yeah, we've tried to convince our customers over the years that remote was the way to go. You don't need to pay for my per diem and my flight and my hotel to sit in your cubicle when all I'm doing is reviewing documents that I could be doing from home. And if it was an internal employee, then they can be just as productive from home. And oh, by the way, I can have a repairman show up and escort him into my house while at the same time getting the work done and providing the earned value that either my company is looking for or my customer's looking for. So it's not a cookie cutter recipe at all for all industries. But I've got an engineering firm in Austin that I'm a city councilman here in my hometown, and they went from hundreds of engineers, maybe not hundreds, a little less than 100 engineers, and they only had 90 seats to now everybody's working remote and they don't know what to do with this and
Yeah.
cubicles. They're like, man, we're just as productive, if not more, because he was having to drive from Dripping Springs to my hometown and then back. and it was just ridiculous. So we've definitely got more efficient, but just like Mr. Frey said, so others need that office environment, and it just puts them in a different mode and makes people productive. Because my wife, she's buzzed me 5 times right now in the last 10 minutes. And I think it's an emergency. I'm like, what do you want? She's like, no, I'm just letting you know I got 2 tickets to the game tomorrow. I'm like, okay. I'm working.
Let me ask one last question.
I'm in a conference call.
We're kind of getting to the end, so let me ask one last question and let me throw it back to the participants. How do you know if you're succeeding? What are the metrics that you're paying attention to now to know whether you're on top of it?
Is there a more specific area?
Do you think metrics have changed? Do you think that the metrics that we're paying attention to have changed or need to change? What have you noticed from your own experience?
I find that most businesses are always 1 generation behind in the metrics, right? And that's in a nutshell. Going back a few topics, all the great comments, it reminded me of a book I found by a guy named Gilbert, whose whole improving performance had to do with replicating exemplars. Right, and that was kind of touched on in a series of comments about 20 minutes ago. And, you know, that's kind of a great hard check to, are we really, what behaviors, and when we get the checklist, are we confirming not only the knowledge, but also the behavior, right? And what are we replicating? Which behavior, which process, what standards are we running to and replicating and training? Because I call it, when we have corporate training, we're pushing this hill of sand, right? But to get to that other end of the high performing bell curve, you got to throw the grains. You can't push them all at once. And that means each individual person has their own needs for becoming more productive.
Right.
You know, Renee, if I can, I'd like to add something to that, because we have that hit right on the nail for us. Our metrics, and we're a relatively small new company still, but in this remote setting, our metrics started to look a little bit more qualitative, maybe than quantitative, at least for some portion of time. And we found that in my experience anyway, and I'll brag on my team all day long. You know, when you see challenges like that, and there's layers and layers and layers of challenges that you have to dig through, and you have to do it quickly in order to keep your doors open, and you really kind of sit down and almost have that heart to heart, and you're facing things like, you know, unemployment is going to pay them better than you can, and, you know, very, very real world, real problems to have. The only real way around that is to just get everybody engaged. And to do that, you have to listen to what they want. And you have to understand that you maybe need to loosen up on this or that rule, or, you know, setting schedules differently, things like that. So I think qualitative metrics are a lot more common, and I don't think they're going to go anywhere. I think we're seeing good results from that.
Yeah. Great comment. Anybody else had experiences like that where you're seeing, you know, the hard numbers are not worth paying attention to if you don't have the soft factors in place?
You don't have the hard numbers, you won't.
Yeah. Well, this is fun. Thank you, everybody. We enjoyed it thoroughly. And thank you so much, participants, for jumping on and sharing your experiences. That was really interesting to the 3 of us as presenters.
So we've just got about a minute left. So I wanted to also thank everyone for coming. I am going to throw our sponsors back up on the screen for everyone to see.
Oh,
let's get this in the right mood.
Yeah.
And this is Elisa. Just to remind everybody, the next TMDA meeting is on July 15th at the same time, 2 to 3:30, remote probably. Probably we'll see. And the topic right now is something along the lines FDA medical device regulations, quick pace changes in the light of EUA, emergency use authorizations. So specifically pandemic specific. What have we learned?